In early September, the video was released of Ray Rice slamming his wife in an elevator. Since then, there have been 2 more similar cases involving NFL players. Today, a discussion about domestic violence and abuse. Joining me is Ben Breskern, the Executive Director of Cedar Valley Friends of the Family, Dr. Penny Pierre, Wartburg College Director of Women's Studies, and Dr. Bill Withers, a Public Relations Professor at Wartburg College. Thanks for being here today. So I'm going to toss the first question over to Ben. A lot of people were kind of confused about Ray Rice's wife going back, and you provide services to women of the Cedar Valley. So what's the biggest challenge you face when trying to help these victims of abuse and violence?
Well, as a shelter program, we have people that are coming in that are leaving that abusive relationship, and they're coming in with no resources, trying to help them understand what's occurred, how do they get through this moment that they're in now, because they're just trying to live day to day at that point, understanding that cycle of violence that they've gone through, and then finding resources that will allow them to move through shelter and try to put their life back together.
And you're also, now you're working on a violence prevention program, working with, young football players. How do you see this, helping future prevention of abuse and violence?
I think prevention is the key. At Cedar Valley Friends of the Family, we like to say that we're shaping a future free of violence and homelessness. And the way that we do that is we engage young males into preventing violence. In the end, it's 95% males that are committing the violence. We have to engage them if we're going to do that. So using a program like Coaching Boys into Men, if Ray Rice would have had that when he was younger, he may not be in this situation at this point in time.
And now, Dr. Pierre, let's talk a little bit about domestic violence in the media. Typically, how does the media report domestic violence? And because it's oftentimes confused, sometimes the victim is accused of causing the violence or asking for it, so to say. So why is this sometimes the case?
Well, I think that in terms of the current cases, that the media tends to report high-profile or sensationalized cases, and they don't treat it like an epidemic. The World Health Organization said that domestic violence, they actually classified it as an epidemic in 1994, and we've really done little to reverse the numbers of domestic violence, both domestically and internationally. And so the problem is that when these high-profile cases are reported, it's often done as a means to titillate, to get high click response. For example, the video that TMZ released with Ray Rice. I mean, I personally, I think that was an unethical move on the part of a media organization to re-victimize the victim in that case. I mean, she has a right to tell her own story, right? And that was completely taken away from her. Not to mention, because he's such a high-profile individual, that there was going to be some polarizing discussion around, who he was, and because she subsequently married him, then it started all the victim shaming and blaming her for being in her situation. And what we know about women who live in abusive households, sometimes they leave their abusers many times and go back to them many times before they leave. And oftentimes the most dangerous time for a woman is when she leaves her abuser. And so the problem is not that the media is covering domestic violence, but the way in which it's covering it. It's covering it as really a sensationalized product of the media, when we should have a sustained, serious, long-term discussion about domestic violence and how we create a culture of domestic violence by what we say and by what we left unsaid.
And real quick, Bill, I just want you to get to, how do you think the NFL handled their PR?
Briefly, the NFL has had a tremendous PR situation blow up in their face, and predominantly it's because they really don't have a systemic policy on how to address some of these things. It is by its nature a very violent sport. Compare and contrast to Major League Baseball, they have systems and protocols and policies in place. The NFL is just unfolding now some things that they know they need to address and be very consistent across the board in how they deal with their professional athletes. And I think that's the biggest issue, is how leadership dealt with it publicly, and then what policies and protocols do we have in place to deal with that now and in the future.
All right, well, thank you very much for being with us here today. You can find more information on the wartburgcircuit.org